Drawing from Observation, Lesson 9, Depicting Volume with Light and Shade. Before starting this lesson, please have the following materials ready, and note that for this lesson, you'll learn about drawing the human figure by drawing a posable wooden mannequin in your materials kit. Materials: sketch pad, ebony pencil, pencil sharpener, ruler, kneaded eraser, and geometric objects. Subject matter: cube, sphere, and posable mannequin from materials kit. Keep track of assignments. Do each exercise in order in your sketch pad, change pages for each exercise and use as many pages as you need, but on each page, write your name and also the number of the exercise, for example, O-9A. Also, after doing the assignments, remember to take photos, both of your drawings and of the subject you drew. We'll remind you to take each photo. The previous lesson introduced value in drawing through the use of hatching on planes and cross-contour lines on curved surfaces. This lesson extends your value skills and reviews the principles of light and shade, then applies these to drawing geometric forms and a figurative toy. There are many reasons to use light and shade in drawing, but we'll focus on the most common one, drawing tones on objects to indicate volume and mass. To make values easier to see and draw, we'll start with the geometric forms in your materials kit. You'll also need a bright directional reading light. But first, let's warm up by practicing tonal effects and learning about the scale of values from light to dark, what artists and designers call a grayscale. A grayscale is a row of squares progressing from white to black in steps, each drawn with its own distinct value. This may seem easy, but as you'll see, drawing tones evenly and smoothly takes care and attention, and still more skill and patience is required to build a range of tones that shift gradually from light to dark. Exercise O-9A, Grayscale. Time, 15 minutes. Materials: ebony pencil and sketch pad, pencil sharpener and kneaded eraser, ruler, subject, grayscale. Watch this demonstration carefully and take notes because you'll be following the same steps. Before beginning to draw, tear out a clean page from your sketch pad and mark off the grayscale on one edge of the paper with 7 1-inch squares. Be sure your grayscale is on the edge of the paper so later you can hold the tones right next to an object to compare values. Below the squares, write numbers 1 through 7 starting on the left. Next, sharpen the ebony pencil to a fine point and darken the square on the far right until it's as black as you can make it. To get an even overall effect, hold the pencil at an angle so the whole surface of the tip touches the paper. Try to keep the pressure steady so the tone is built up across the entire surface evenly. Then gradually darken the whole area using a similar motion but steadily increasing pressure while passing the pencil again and again over the same surface. The square on the far left will stay white, and the scale will advance square by square from white to black, but you won't be laying it in that way. Instead, the next step will be to lay in a middle gray tone in the middle square using the same technique. You can use the example on the video as a value reference, but don't try to get it perfect. You'll probably need to make adjustments to all the squares as you go along. Continue to add tones to both ends of the scale. In the second square, shade in a very light gray next to the white, and in the sixth square, shade in a very dark gray next to the black. Then fill in the steps between each of these tones and the middle gray. When you've gone through the whole scale, take a short pause to see if you succeeded in making each step distinct while making the values gradually darker at a consistent pace from white to black. As we said at the beginning, this isn't as easy as it might seem. To test these effects, stand back and squint as you look at your grayscale. Squinting blurs together tones that are close to the same value and makes big jumps in value more obvious. Later on, you'll use squinting to see values in objects and spaces. Now, finish your grayscale by making the necessary adjustments, lightening up one square and darkening another. If you notice uneven tones, even them out by either darkening them gradually with the pencil or lightening them carefully with the kneaded eraser. Rather than rubbing with the eraser, flatten it out and pat it gently on the area you want to lighten, and the eraser will pull up some of the graphite. Only a kneaded eraser works this way. And when the eraser gets dirty, you can knead it to get a cleaner surface. Okay, start. and stop. Now we'll apply your skills with tone to draw simple geometric forms, a cube and a sphere. Understanding how light and shade appears on these forms will help you see tones more easily on complicated forms. For this exercise, you'll need a directional reading light. Exercise O-9B, Light and Shade on Geometric Forms. Time, 4 stages, Stage 1 at 4 minutes, Stage 2 at 5 minutes, Stage 3 at 10 minutes, and Stage 4 at 6 minutes, all equaling 25 minutes. Materials, ebony pencil on sketch pad, pencil sharpener, kneaded eraser, geometric objects from materials kit, and bright reading light. Subject, light objects on a surface. First, tear out a sheet of paper from your sketch pad and place it on the table or desk in front of you where you plan to draw. Then place the two objects on the paper with space in between so you can see each one clearly, but be sure they're close enough together for the light to hit them both at about the same place. Darken the room so there's no other strong light directly on the objects, but leave enough light to see your drawing as well. Put the directional reading light in front of the objects and off to one side. Point the light towards the objects and turn it on. Make sure the light hits each object so that it leaves some areas light and others darker. Note that for this exercise, you will be watching a demonstration, but don't copy the video. Look carefully at the objects in front of you so you actually see the values described. Then draw them as you see them, following the steps you will watch. Stage 1. In the middle of the page, sketch the cube and the sphere using light lines and no tones. Draw the objects life-size, or preferably a little larger, and make sure their proportions are accurate in relation to one another. To help ground the objects, sketch in the shape of each object's shadow as it is cast on the surface. On the sphere, draw light lines around the areas that are lightest in tone. The top plane is the light area on the cube. Leave these areas white for now and leave the paper below the objects white too. Lightly write 1 on each light area. Don't worry, you'll erase these numbers later. Okay, start. and stop. Draw light lines around the other value areas and number them based on comparing their value to the grayscale. To do this effectively, take the sheet with the grayscale on it and hold it up to the object to check which square corresponds with which observable tone. Squinting will help here too. Write value numbers on each area where there is a corresponding tone. Tone in your drawn shapes indicating a value change with the corresponding tone for the number or range of values you noted for each. Okay, start. and stop. The areas you've drawn so far can be labeled A, light area. This refers to the part or parts of an object that the light hits directly. B, shadow area. This refers to the surfaces or planes that turn away from the light. C, core shadow. This is a deeper value area, usually just below the light area. D, reflected light. This is a lighter area, usually just below the core shadow, which is not illuminated by direct light, but by light reflecting off the surface under the object. E, cast shadow. This is a dark area on a surface beneath or beside an object made by the object blocking out the light. By drawing in these distinct tonal areas, you've begun to give your objects a sense of three-dimensionality. But so far, you're probably putting the tones in evenly, making the sphere look flat in spots. The next steps will help solve the problem. In stage 3, you'll add softer tones and value transitions. This must be done carefully. Again, watch the demonstration and take notes before drawing. Stage 3. Add a darker tone to the core shadow in the middle of the sphere just below the light area. Let this dark tone lighten gradually to each side as it approaches the outer edges of the sphere. Also let it gradually lighten below the dark to show that the surface is turning downward. Here, the dark tone transitions into the reflected light, which you can leave a relatively lighter gray. Note, with the sphere, you must be careful not to make divisions between the light and dark areas too sharp, because that will suggest an edge between two planes rather than a curving surface. It's just the opposite with the cube, which we'll draw next. The core shadow on the cube starts at the top of both of the side planes just where they meet the top plane. The darker of the two side planes gets darker where it meets the lighter plane. Here, make the value change between the planes sharp and crisp, but let the tones lighten gradually as they move downward away from the edge and towards the surface. This is also an effect of reflected light. Okay, start. and stop. Stage 4. Add a darker tone to the cast shadow for each object. The shadow should start out dark just below the object and get lighter as it goes further away. This effect is caused by ambient light bouncing off of other surfaces. Notice that the dark tones of the core shadow and the darker areas of the cast shadow just below the objects make the lower surface of the objects appear slightly lighter than they did before. This visual effect, as we mentioned before, is caused by light reflected on the object from the underlying surface. Reflected light is brighter on the sphere because it curves away from the surface it's sitting on, so artists often lighten the reflected light area just above where the object touches the surface. But be careful not to make the reflected light as bright as the area that receives light directly. Finally, add a very light gray, like the second square in your grayscale, all around the light area of your sphere and across the light plane of your cube, but leave it pure white near to the core of the shadow. This bright spot will be the highlight. This is the spot hit most directly by the light source. Again, watch the demonstration and take notes before drawing. Okay, start. And stop. Take a photo of the geometric objects with the light on them exactly as it was when you drew them. Then, if you need to, take a short pause. Going through the shading steps has admittedly been a slow, careful process. But once you know how to draw geometric forms and understand how light and shade functions on them, you should be able to apply these skills to draw all kinds of subjects, including the human figure and face. To prove this point, we'll take on the figure for the last assignment in this lesson and devote all of Lesson 10 to drawing the face. Drawing the human figure could occupy a course all by itself, in fact, several courses. But building on what you've learned so far, you can get a taste of it by drawing a figurative object, like a stuffed animal, action figure, or a similar toy. Here, we'll draw an object used by artists, a posable wooden mannequin. Let's get to know this subject with some information on proportions, followed by a few quick sketches. Exercise O-9C. Light and shade on a figurative subject, the mannequin. Time, 2 steps at 5 and 20 minutes, so 25 minutes. Materials, ebony pencil, sketch pad, pencil sharpener, ruler, kneaded eraser, bright reading light. Subject, posable wooden mannequin. Place the figure on a surface nearby and pose it in the straightest position possible so we can consider its proportions. The normal adult body is 7 to 8 heads tall, with the midpoint where the thigh bone joins the pelvis. The mannequin is 6.5 heads tall, and the midpoint is where the legs are attached to the abdomen. Now, pose the mannequin in different ways and sketch it quickly in a gestural or constructionist manner. Keep general proportions in mind and look for the largest shapes, the head, body, and limbs. Also, try to get the feeling of motion in the pose, but keep the drawing simple and don't worry about details. Put the figure in different poses and draw it 5 times in 5 minutes. Okay, start. and stop. Next, we'll develop one of these poses using light and shade. After posing the figure, shine the reading light on it as you did with the block and sphere, so light and dark areas are distinct and easy to see. Then, sketch the figure in lightly once more, making sure the drawing is life-size, about 5.5 inches or larger. Then draw in the simple forms that make up the head, torso, hips, and limbs, checking to make sure they're in the correct position and proportion in relation to each other. Now begin to apply tone, starting with a light to middle gray to all the areas of the mannequin that aren't brightly illuminated. This can include tones on the object, cast shadows on the surface, and possibly dark areas in the background, especially if they're surrounding a light area. If you're not sure whether an area should be left white or toned, step back, look at the subject as a whole, and squint. Do this often during the drawing process. After blocking in the middle gray tone, add some darker accents to represent the core shadows and add lines for the details. Continue to develop the drawing as long as time allows. Okay, start. And stop. Great job! Take a photo of the mannequin with the light on it just like it was when you drew it. Also, be sure you took photos of each page of drawings. Now you're ready to go on to the final lesson using your full range of skills to draw a portrait.